Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. We have a very special presentation today. We'll be talking about AI-powered search for the life sciences, and our speakers today are Mike Gualtieri, who is VP and Principal Analyst at Forrester Research, and we are also joined by Kevin Potts, Director of Strategic Marketing Informatics at PerkinElmer. So PerkinElmer is one of Attivio's partners, and they market Attivio products in the life sciences. So before we get started with the webinar, I just want to go through two very brief housekeeping items. The first thing to know is that this webinar is being recorded, so everyone who signed up for it will get a follow-up email with a link to the video, and you're welcome to share that email with your colleagues. The second item is about Q&A. So we have saved some time at the end of this presentation for questions, but you can enter the questions at any time during the presentation. Just enter the text question in the question box of your GoToWebinar controls. So with all of that said, we will go ahead and dive into today's topic, and I will hand control over to Mike Gualtieri, who's going to get us started.
Thank you, Jane, and hi, everyone. Mike Gualtieri here again, Principal Analyst at Forrester, and one of my coverage areas is what we call cognitive search, and cognitive search is AI-powered search. So before we get into our conversation with Kevin Potts and PerkinElmer, I wanted to give you a little level set on what exactly cognitive search is. Essentially, the way to think about it is cognitive search is all about helping people find knowledge. And it's been powered by the big data trend. A lot of people say that data is the new oil. Our perspective is it's a little bit more like the sun. It's virtually limitless. And what's interesting about this trend is that companies have plenty of it. And I'm not going to bore you with the increases in data. We all know it's increasing rapidly. But what's interesting on this slide is that companies report that about 50% of their data sources are internal and 50% are external. And that's certainly relevant in the life sciences business, where you have an enormous amount of information in lab notebooks, regulatory affairs, research, but also external, things like PubMed, et cetera. The problem that cognitive search seeks to solve is that of finding knowledge, finding information. And our recent study that we had is more than half of information workers are interrupted in some way to spend time looking for information, insights, answers that lead to more knowledge. And that is what search attempts to solve. Now, the reason why we call this cognitive search is because we see this as the new generation of enterprise search that's powered by AI technologies. So things like natural language processing, machine learning, it uses these technologies to ingest and understand, organize the information in ways that wasn't previously possible with normal search. And of course, that makes the queries more relevant and the completeness of the results more relevant as well. So if you look at sort of the history of how we've evolved to cognitive search, search started back, basically when the web was around back in the 90s, and it was all about keyword search. You took in that content, you stripped off the words, you threw them in an index, someone typed those words, it would return those documents. Got a little more sophisticated, started to incorporate natural language processing, and then using machine learning to get smarter about those search results. And finally, we arrive at cognitive search, where it uses all of these technologies, including more natural human interactions in the form of plain old search query, like asking it specifically a question, but also search that is automatically embedded in applications. Call that predictive search. Maybe someday we'll get to Elon Musk's vision of the neural lace, but that would be kind of interesting if we did. So cognitive search at its core allows people to find digital content. It's all about that digital content. And this is, in effect, what enterprise search was about as well. I am trying to find a certain document. But cognitive search takes this a couple steps further. And because it understands the concepts, the topics, and the entities in that content, it can also help users find hidden knowledge, not just content that they're seeking, they know about, but new information that can help them in their research, help them make decisions. But it also finds relationships among all of that data. So this isn't just about returning a list of documents, but it's also providing insights about other relationships. The natural language processing, machine learning, combined with the indexing, will find relationships that you normally might not consider or normally might not seek out. So that's cognitive search. Collectively, when an organization implements cognitive search, everyone in that organization who uses it gets smarter because they have the full scope of all of that internal and external data. Really important point that cognitive search isn't just about unstructured data like PDFs or documents or files or web pages. But companies are using cognitive search also to index and process information from databases that typically contain structured information. So when you put both of these together, you also get a more powerful repository. And the name of the game is that every user has a different intent. And so cognitive search also uses contextual information about that user and about the task that they're performing to bring back knowledge-relevant results. So everyone isn't necessarily going to get the same answers back. They're going to get the answers back that are most relevant to them. It uses these AI technologies to continuously improve those results, and it's not always about that traditional portal where you go to a search page and just enter in text. It's often embedded in applications, so search results come back before you even ask for them, and because they're contextual, they can be very relevant. And relevancy is the key, and the key to that is the context. What is the task that this user is doing? So if someone's in the lab working with a lab notebook, the search should bring back results that are relevant to that. What topics is this user explicitly? What did they say they're interested in? The search will come back that is filtered based upon that. What has the user found valuable in the past? So it learns from what's most relevant to this user, and also the network effect and the collaborative effect of what have similar users found valuable in the past. So because cognitive search uses these AI technologies, it's better at all of these things. Now in the life sciences domain, which we're going to talk about in a second with Kevin, there's many different applications throughout the life science organization. The regulatory affairs group of any pharma company is huge. I mean, it can have hundreds, if not 1,000 people, right? And a very important job of finding relevant study reports, understanding what's happening outside what people are talking about. So cognitive search can enable and make regulatory affairs organizations more important. Research scientists are using it to investigate off-label uses for already approved drugs, again, searching internal and external data. And it's often used to investigate and research real-world data after a drug is in the market, using claims, hospital records, which are often a combination of structured and unstructured, and even looking at social media for comments that people are making about the drug that could potentially indicate some safety issues even after the clinical trials. It can also be a workhorse in the lab because lab notebooks are sort of the go-to place for researchers. And large pharma companies often have lots of acquisitions, and they may have lab notebooks spread across the organization, but that might have valuable data. So cognitive search can help reduce duplicative efforts and even dramatically reduce the time to research by building on the work of others. Of course, it can also be used by the enterprise as a whole to find corporate information. but it's also used by sales and marketing organizations to provide the details about particular drugs to immediately answer this question. So that's just a few of the applications specific to life sciences. Now, when companies are looking for particular solutions, cognitive search platforms, the first criteria is it truly cognitive search? So is it using indexing, natural language processing, and machine learning? If it's just using indexing, that's the old enterprise search. You're not going to have the most relevancy. It also has to understand all the data. It's not just about documents. It's also about databases. It has to scale to handle any amount of data, and it has to employ the latest AI technologies, natural language processing, also known as NLU or natural language understanding, and machine learning. And it also isn't just about like what you think of as the Google search, asking a question. It can do that, obviously, but it has to also be easily embeddable within other applications, such as lab notebooks or research portals or collaborative portals. The application that researchers already use, the last thing you want is for them to keep switching back and forth between, the task application they're using and other applications. So with that, as the definition and use cases for cognitive search, I'm going to hand this back to Jane, and we can begin the discussion. Jane, back to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Kevin. Sorry, Mike. So we just heard from Mike Gualtieri of Forrester, and now we are going to hand control over to Kevin Potts, who is joining us from PerkinElmer. And Kevin is going to talk to the implications of cognitive search in the life sciences. Kevin, over to you. And I can tell you,
Thanks.
Your slides are showing now.
Perfect. Thanks, Jane. I just want to spend a few minutes giving some context for why I'm here talking with you right now from PerkinElmer. PerkinElmer, as you can see from this slide, is a large global company, but if you don't work in a pharmaceutical or biotech R&D group or a clinical trial team, you may not have heard of us. So I want to share some quick information. All 50 of the top 50 biopharmaceutical companies globally are PerkinElmer customers. A major focus of PerkinElmer is supporting the research and development and clinical trial efforts of our customers by providing instruments, software, chemicals and reagents, and a full service laboratory full laboratory services, so researchers can stay focused on doing the research while we handle the setup, running, and maintenance of laboratory instruments and software. Within PerkinElmer, the group that I work with is the informatics group, and what we do is we provide a variety of software applications that come together from collaboration and scientific smarts, like applications like ChemDraw or our own electronic lab notebook, and data integration capabilities like from our partner Attivio, and data analysis and visualization. So we bring all of these different technologies together, all these different software together to help companies handle the big data type questions that they focus on, specifically in research and development and in clinical trials and the like. I'm not going to show this slide in great detail. I mean, this is something that if you're in the life sciences industry, you're very familiar with. What are some of the big market trends over on the right? This is an area of explosive growth, lots of different changes regulatorily happening, lots of new technologies that are coming on the market, which are creating just an explosion of different systems and different data that's captured, as well as the ability for patients to start providing more data electronically. And all of this is coming together to what we see, the implication in the lower left, which is the importance not just of analytics to make better decision making, but also data aggregation and content analytics to leverage hidden and fragmented data sources, which is really the crux of what we're here to talk about today. Think about the different potential benefits to your company if you could take action on these questions here. What would be the potential game changers that your company could provide in the area of research, in the area of clinical trials, in the area of post-market capabilities once your drug's out on the market and being prescribed literally to millions of people. If you had a better way to understand the information that's being collected and being able to put it together to make better decisions, that is really the impact of what we're talking about today. And we're going to talk about it a little bit later in the Q&A session, but I did want to try to just set the stage for here are the types of questions that customers are coming to us for. And one of the things that we realized was that about 3 years ago, we recognized the scientists that were using our lab instruments and our software were increasingly faced with the time-consuming task of assembling, reading, and summarizing data from various sources, including databases, documents, and files on the internet. And the time constraints associated with this process often resulted in them having to make decisions or take actions with incomplete information. They didn't have all the information available. So PerkinElmer sought to provide these scientists with a 360-degree view of all the relevant information to help them accelerate their research. And so we went out and developed a strategic partnership with Attivio to help our customers do this by allowing them to easily search and unify data and unlock data from both structured and unstructured data and be able to view it all together. One of the big reasons why we selected Attivio was because we were looking for a leading industry provider in the area of natural language processing, machine learning, analytics, and knowledge graphing capabilities that could do it at an enterprise scale. And taking that technology that Attivio provides and wrapping around it our extensive scientific domain and our knowledge of big data, we felt provided a really incredible value to our customers in the area of data discovery and search that will help really reduce the time to insight for research and development teams and for clinical trial teams and for safety teams. And lastly, I'm not going to, think about what your life was like before Google, and think about how productive you are in your own personal life now that you have Google, at your fingertips, and you can find out practically almost any piece of information just to help you make your life more simple at home. Think about that for your researchers. Think of some of these companies have upwards of 25,000 researchers, scientists, and knowledge workers. And what would be the benefit of just helping all of these people save 1 hour a week in terms of finding data faster? And what might that be? And that's really the transformational value of cognitive search. So that's the introduction I just wanted to share with you of what we're seeing in the market, what our customers are talking about. And Jane, I think we're probably ready to start some of the Q&A.
Okay, well, thank you for your presentation, Kevin. For this next section, the next portion of the webinar, we are going to just go through some discussion questions. So we have 6 questions for our 2 speakers, and for each of the questions I'll have Mike Gualtieri and Kevin Potts share their thoughts on these different topics. So we'll get started with that, and just a reminder to the audience that after this portion of the webinar, there will be a live Q&A session. So as we go through this, if you have any questions for Mike or for Kevin, go ahead and put them in the question box of GoToWebinar. So the first question we have is about cognitive search. Why does cognitive search promise to be so transformative for life sciences? So Kevin, do you want to get us started with this one?
Yeah, Jane, I'd be happy to. I'll tell you what we see from customers. So give you some context of this area and how it's become so hot in literally the last 6 months. PerkinElmer and Attivio, as our partner, are currently engaged in 6 different proof of concepts and selection cycles. 5 of those 6 are in the top 25 biopharma companies, and that has been within the last 4 months that these have come up. So, when I joined about 1.5 years ago, it was not a hot topic area, and now it has become very hot. And when we talk to these companies as to what they're trying to achieve, the big thing we're hearing from them is data management challenges and how data management challenges impede the effective use of data for accurate and fast decision making. And when we think about it, why is this? And there are three big reasons that rise to the top from our customers. One, simply too many data sets. On the R&D side, you have laboratory information management systems, you have electronic laboratory notebooks, you have chemical drawing software, and a variety of other applications. In clinical trials, you have electronic data capture, CTMS systems, IVRS systems, imaging systems that are all have to come together to make decisions. And even once a drug's out in the market and the safety side, you have pharmacovigilance systems, you have mobile health systems, you have real-world databases. And a lot of this data, which leads to the second problem, is both structured and unstructured. And it's very hard to look and interpret that data together. And then the third big reason why this is so challenging and therefore so ripe for transformation is that more than 50% of the data comes from outside the corporate firewall, whether it's from clinicaltrials.gov or published journal articles in PubMed or social media, or even the FDA's adverse event reporting system. You can just see very clearly why this has become such a big problem. And that's really what I think of as the big reason why it's so transformative for life sciences.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. Mike, what are your thoughts on the topic?
Yeah, so I think like any industry, life sciences has a lot of jargon, phraseology and abbreviations and other very difficult information for normal search engines to assess. So I think one of the characteristics of cognitive search, again, is to automatically elevate those terms and those phrases using advanced text analytics to make sense of that, so that people can search in the language that they are used to searching in. So they don't have to do a translation to what they think the search engine will want. They can just use the language that they would normally use. So I think from a technological standpoint, the natural language processing is much better when you have a very complex industry language as well.
Thank you. So we'll go to the next question. So here's the next discussion topic. What are the core AI building blocks that are covered by cognitive search? So Mike, I think this question is in your wheelhouse.
Sure, yeah, it's a good segue because I was just talking about that.
Yeah.
So what is natural language processing? So natural language processing is used on the ingestion of data. So you imagine you have all of these sources, and imagine you have a document that's multiple pages or even a paragraph, right? So there's meaning, there's semantic meaning in those documents, in those sentences. So what natural language processing will do, it will add to the index higher order meaning and abstraction. So if you think of a straight index, it takes words, it works with words, right? What natural language processing does is it turns those words, those sentences, those paragraphs, the entire document into higher order concepts. So that's a key distinguishing technology. Now, natural language processing does use machine learning. It uses advanced text analytics under the covers. But when we break out machine learning, what we're talking about as well as how it learns to become more relevant over time. So as users search for things, as they find those things relevant, the system learns what is more relevant to the users, and then all of the users benefit from that. It also learns, as I talked about in my presentation, the context. Every user is different, but users share interests. So if this particular content for this search phrase was interesting to this user, it may very well be interesting to other similar users. So in that way, machine learning, makes the content more relevant, but it also finds similarities in the hundreds or thousands of people using the search engine.
Okay, thank you, Mike. We'll go on to the next discussion topic then. So for our next topic, this is more focused on the life sciences industry in particular. So why is the life sciences industry so ripe for innovation with these AI technologies that we're talking about? Kevin, do you want to get us started on this topic?
Sure, Jane. It really comes down to three things. One is just the incredible pressure to raise R&D productivity quickly. The second is the need to speed to market new innovations, whether they be new treatments or new indications or new uses for an existing drug, treatment, or compound. And the third area is this new area of focus on disease monitoring once the drug is already out in the market. And this gets into things like safety and understanding of real-world evidence. Let me talk for a second about the first one, which is the pressure to raise R&D productivity quickly. Think about the researcher or scientist being able to look at all of the information about a specific compound by just using one term or one description of a disease. Think about the fact that if you could see all the associated genes, all the associated projects that were run internally that were buried in a variety of different lab notebooks, for example. What this power comes from is the ability to take, for example, a registration number or an internal asset identifier from an internal system and associate that to a gene name, and then take that and associate that to all of the information from publicly available sources of data like PubMed and all the journals from, I think, back to 1946 that have been associated with that gene. And think about the ability for the researcher to see not just your internal information tied to that asset identifier, but also all of the associated synonyms and proteins, whether the protein names have changed or whether there have been new names for the compounds. They could see all of that in one location. And what this does is this replaces the internal search of a ELN system and then the searching of a SharePoint system and then going in and searching PubMed and going in and searching clinicaltrials.gov. So within one interface, you can see all of that information pop up. And as Mike alluded to, that makes this even more complex in the top 50 biopharma companies is M&A. Many times you don't just have one electronic lab notebook, but you may have multiple electronic notebooks. You don't have just one SharePoint system, but you may have multiple SharePoint systems, each one coming from the respective company that was acquired to make the current existing company. So that poses a whole level of challenge above and beyond that many companies are struggling with. In terms of speeding the market with new innovation, the real question people are trying to ask is, how do I get this drug through the approval process faster? And where cognitive search comes in is when you ask the question, can I show me all of the study reports and all of the documentation to compile and complete my biologic license application or my BLA submission for this drug? And this use case is important because it helps you get submission ready faster and reduce the likelihood of a rejected submission, or even worse, a potential market withdrawal because you missed some documentation that should have been submitted. And then in the area of disease monitoring, this is the new area which really gets at, once the drug's out on the market, and the importance of being able to track not just information related to the clinical evidence that you captured from your phase 2 through phase 4 clinical trials and post-marketing studies, but also be able to pull in real-world data sources like prescription databases, claims databases, electronic medical records, global and country registries, and then finally non-traditional sources of data like social media, or it could be the FDA adverse event reporting system, which is used to capture post-marketing drug safety monitoring system information that will help guide your documents and, for example, changes to drug labels. So that's the new area. But it really comes down to those three areas as what we see as the real challenges life sciences companies are struggling with and where cognitive search comes in.
Okay. Thanks, Kevin. So, Mike, do you have thoughts on this topic to add?
Well, of course, I agree with everything Kevin said. I think he's right on. I would just, reinforce the research point, which is, about testing hypotheses, right? It can cost millions of dollars and a lot of time to test a particular hypothesis, and this is what, drug discovery is all about. That decision, that go or no-go decision to go off on that research stream depends upon the information that people have on what's done before, what's currently being done. So, that is a critical use case of cognitive search too. That's not just relevant information. That's not just what you want is what's relevant. You want completeness. of information, because if you can see everything, well, maybe there's something that says, you know what, we shouldn't proceed with this, or maybe a new hypothesis arises, or maybe it gets revised. So I think that's a key aspect of cognitive search for life sciences as well.
Okay, thank you, Mike. So the next topic, so we're going to get a little bit more specific, and we're going to talk about the use cases for cognitive search in the life sciences sector. Kevin, what do you think about this, the top use cases in life sciences?
Yes, Jane. This is kind of something we've already been talking a little about. Mike introduced some of the use cases in his overview, and we talked a little about them. Obviously, I think the number one use case here is this drug discovery use case, which really, I would say, can be described as mining institutional knowledge of a drug target or disease indicator and accelerating internal collaboration by connecting with experts and key opinion leaders. And if you think about that problem, I mean, the information could be everything that, what you might be searching on could be, the name of a key opinion leader. It could be an internal asset identification number. It could be a gene. It could be a disease. It could be a drug, or it could even be the name of a competitor who might be doing some research in this area. When you think about the information you're drawing from, it could be a clinical trials database. It could be publicly available journals or clinical trial information. It could be coming from an electronic lab notebook. And when you think about the type of data, the format of the data, it could be you want to look at a PowerPoint, or you want to look at completed studies or ongoing observational studies. You might want to look at associated protocols or reports or conference presentations or data listings. So you can see right away that this is a very broad challenge. And what makes it so difficult, and I'll kind of set up what are some of the challenges here, is that the cognitive search has to be able to intercept data from both the ingestion side, so pulling in all the data from all the different sources, as well as it's got to be able to intercept data from the query side, the end user, the scientist or researcher who is typing in a question or looking for information. And the cognitive search has to be able to enrich that data and pick out key phrases or topics. And it also has to be able to do that in multiple languages. Another big challenge is that you have to be able to take both structured and unstructured data sources together. And then the final major challenge is you have to be able to handle huge amounts of data. So when you think about being able to ingest the full PubMed or a full clinicaltrials.gov or the NIH grant data, these are massive databases of information that you have to be able to handle very fastly. And that's just the R&D side. I think what you'll see here on the faster submission, which is the second use case we talked about, it's very similar to what we talked about before, is that you've got data from different systems. Some of the systems may be external, although less likely. Obviously, very similar to what we saw on the drug discovery side, you've got data formats in a variety of data formats, both structured and unstructured data. And then you clearly have new data that's being added to the system all the time. So when you search on something yesterday and you go back today, there's more data to look at. And then the third use case that we talked about was the disease monitoring once the drug's out on the market. And once again, this is very similar to the other two use cases. I think there's a common theme here in terms of what makes it so challenging is you have to be able to search on various ontologies. You have to use, you don't necessarily know the right terms, or the term maybe have multiple synonyms that you have to be able to connect to. You have to search for multiple databases. You have to look at data related to the outcome and the treatment, and all that information must be accessible. For example, treatment X and outcome Y occurring also within patients who have records for complication Z. So those are just some of the things, and once again, like the other two use cases, the real difficulty is that data is coming from many different systems, some of them internal, some of them external, some of them structured, some of them unstructured, and that the data is varied and changing, and that once again, in this case of disease monitoring, new data is constantly being collected and added to the systems. So I think those are kind of some of the most common use cases and some of the most common challenges that life sciences companies face in this area.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. Mike, what do you think about this topic, the top use cases in the life sciences?
I think Kevin hit hit the right topics. I mean, what I would add is that many of these use cases also have some unique requirements that we haven't brought up, which is security of the information. Many companies are concerned who's seeing what, and this isn't just about, clinical records and de-identifying individuals, but it's also about IP and protecting that. So cognitive search platforms will be able to use single sign-on, inherit those permissions, because there's some information that people can see, there's some information they can't. The other thing that I would add that I think is unique to life sciences as well is, we keep talking about all the information, right? And that's actually the problem. We want to see all the information that's relevant, but we don't want to see too much information. Even just when you think of peer-reviewed journals, a lot of those journals are no longer relevant. New science has, furthered, new publications have furthered the science. So, cognitive search also has the ability to understand what is no longer relevant through machine learning over time as well. So I think that's another factor that crosses all of these use cases as well.
Yeah, those are excellent points, Mike. Thank you.
Yep.
So we'll move on to the next discussion question. And this is about the value. What value should life sciences companies expect from cognitive search? Mike, what do you think about this topic?
Well, I think it's all about, well, I shouldn't say it's all about that, but it's first and foremost, I think it's productivity gains in all of the processes. If we just take regulatory affairs as an example, right? Because we've been talking a lot about drug discovery, but regulatory affairs, when they're preparing those submissions, there's an enormous amount of information that they have to look through, and in many cases, if it just pops up as relevant, they have to read it because they have to figure out, is this relevant or not? So there's a huge workflow process that goes into that. Natural language processing can classify documents and prioritize them, what is most likely to be relevant, right? Because there's this whole smoothing out of the workflow process, and I think this is relevant to all the other use cases as well. So I think first and foremost, it's productivity. So if our study, which was about generically knowledge workers, if they spend 54% of their time, being interrupted looking for information, the idea is that with cognitive search, you dramatically reduce that, and you actually do predictive search. So, this isn't something we've talked about too much, but the idea that search is embedded in the application that the user is using, and in the course of using that application, it can do predictive search or proactive search, bringing results that may be relevant to even the task at hand. So again, search isn't just about that text box you go to. It's also about this predictive or proactive search. So I think productivity is the main benefit. The other benefit, and they speak to some of the use cases that Kevin talked about, the real-world data, right? Avoiding or addressing potential safety issues before they occur obviously has huge implications for a pharmaceutical company as well.
Good. Okay. Thank you, Mike. Kevin, what would you add to this question of the value life sciences companies should expect from cognitive search?
Once again, I completely echo the points that Mike's already made. Customers are telling us what they're looking for first and foremost is improved efficiency through a data-driven process. And this goes back to that concept of if you are paying 10,000 to 25,000 researchers and scientists and knowledge workers inside your company, their salaries, and each one of them can save 1 hour per week searching for information that will help them make better decisions about their research. That unleashes an incredible amount of extra time that has just a dollar value of somewhere between $25 million and $75 million per year of time that can be devoted to additional research, additional collaboration. And then on top of that, we talked about drug discovery and how that can lead to better, more innovative treatments that can be discovered through this collaboration and through being able to do things that you couldn't do before. I mean, once again, I'll use the analogy of think about the things you can do today because you have tools like Google in your personal life. And then the third area is getting treatments into the hands of doctors and patients faster. And this is all about getting your drug through the submission process faster and being able to make sure you have all the information necessary to make a bulletproof submission. So those are kind of those three values: improved efficiency, better planning for future treatments, and getting treatments into the hands of doctors and patients faster.
Good. Very good points. Thank you. So we will move on. This is the sixth question, and this is the final question in the discussion portion of our presentation. So this final question is really in Mike, it's in your wheelhouse. So what's on the horizon for machine learning and natural language processing?
Well, more and better. You know, in the last few years, I mean, machine learning and NLP have been around for a long time. But it's been in recent years that there's been this whole new wave of innovation that's occurring. Part of that innovation is because we have a lot more data, and machine learning and natural language processing likes more data. So we have new techniques. We have deep learning, which can analyze images. We have new ways of doing natural language processing so it can be more accurate. And we can certainly handle multiple languages as well. You know, that's not something we brought up, but a lot of this information, a lot of it's published in English, but a lot of the aftermarket information and others is not. So it has to handle multiple languages, and the new innovations that are occurring in machine learning, natural language understanding are getting us closer to that. I think probably everyone is familiar with different interfaces as well, things like Amazon Echo or your phone. So I think we're also getting to a point where, and I've seen demos of this, where cognitive search systems can easily be hooked up to these devices. And I think in the future, in conference rooms, we're going to see cognitive search sitting there in every meeting. And we're going to see participants in that meeting actually asking it questions. And it's going to participate in the meeting with answers that will also make those meetings more productive as well.
Great. Well, that I would love to have that in one of my meetings. Let's maybe Attivio will start developing that, and we'll have that in our meetings, and we'll see how it works.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Well, this has been a really great discussion. So thank you both, Mike and Kevin. For the audience, we're moving on to our Q&A section of this presentation. We have several questions already in the queue, but feel free to enter more questions. This is your opportunity to ask live questions for Mike Gualtieri and for Kevin Potts. And we will just get through as many questions as we have time for. So the first question, Kevin, it looks like this question would be a good one for you. Somebody is asking, can you just elaborate on how specifically we can use this tool for drug safety purposes? And this person is suggesting that examples would help if you have any examples as well.
The example that comes to mind in a drug safety scenario is a drug's out on the market, and all of a sudden you're a safety expert inside a pharmaceutical company, and you get notification from someone who may be prescribing that drug or something like that, that there's some kind of indication, some kind of adverse event or something like that. And you want to quickly research. Maybe it was a complication where the patient was on one drug and they were on this drug too, and all of a sudden something bad happened, and it hadn't been something that you were aware of. So once again, it's coming out of left field. It's not something that was anticipated. And one of the ways you can quickly go and use Attivio in this manner is to quickly search on the combination of those two terms and find out if there's ever been a clinical trial internally that had any interaction between those two drugs, or if there was any outside published research related to those two drugs. Now, let me say first of all, I am not a safety expert. I'm not someone who knows in detail how this works. This was just described to me by one of our customers, and the point was the person on the safety side could immediately start to research that issue and find out. Rather than waiting for more information, they could quickly go out and start to query the system to find out if there's been any research or there's any ongoing research that might somehow implicate these two drugs. Of course, the real question, or I would assume one of the real questions is this just a random event, or is this really tied to the interaction of these two drugs? And you can wait till multiple events come through, or alternately you can start to go out and see if there's any kind of information that might give you some supporting indication that there could be an issue or not. And so that's one example of how we see this type of capability in the hands of safety experts.
Yeah, and Kevin, I would add to that just a reminder that cognitive search through its natural language processing has advanced text analytics capabilities. So what that means is that it can also be used to automatically ingest feeds and assign a sentiment, right? So if you are looking for, if you do have a report of some sort of adverse effect, and you may have hundreds, thousands, or more from news stories, from social media, and you want to look through all of those. Again, do you have to read every single one of them? Cognitive search can assign a sentiment, and again, prioritize. Like, all right, these have good sentiment for this use. These are the bad sentiments. Rise to the top of the list so you can analyze them. So again, a time saver.
Perfect example, Mike.
Yeah, good. Okay, so next question. Somebody is asking, and Mike, I think this would be a good one for you. Is the heart of cognitive search basically a correlational or frequency analysis?
Interesting question, because traditional text analytics uses statistical methods, and I think that's what the attendee is referring to about the frequency analysis. So that is part of it, but natural language processing can also use machine learning, which is more about correlations, finding correlations. Most text analytics, like if you just look at pure text analytics, and that's a separate market. You can get products just to do that. And our suggestion is that cognitive search already has that. So the simple answer is that machine learning uses correlations, and a statistical text analysis uses frequency, and most products have a little bit of both in them. And I think when we think about the future of cognitive search, and when I answered that question about, what's the future of machine learning and NLP, and I said more and better, that's what we're working towards. One final comment on that is deep learning takes a totally different approach. It uses what's called a recurrent neural network to find patterns in data that's totally different from finding correlations and the use of statistical frequencies in text analytics. So, complex question, short answer, but I hope that helps.
Okay, thank you. So this next question will be for Kevin. So the person is asking, will the cognitive search and natural language processing tool be integrated with PerkinElmer signals for translational?
That's a great question. So first of all, I am not shall we say, knowledgeable enough or the right person to answer the question about any specific PerkinElmer product in that area. I primarily work with Attivio, but what I will say is we are working very aggressively and have already delivered Attivio search capabilities inside PerkinElmer software applications so that, for example, you can search. Well, one simple example is we can search a chemical structure and show the results not only of the chemical structure but all of the associated data related to that to help researchers look at when they want to search on a chemical structure and then find information related to it, or all the variety of chemicals that show up. So that's just one example of a use case where we've already embedded Attivio. So it's a PerkinElmer product, it's a PerkinElmer interface, but Attivio is allowing that behind-the-scenes power that it provides. And we are working with a number of our products right now, trying to understand with our customers what's the most valuable to them. So really it comes down to where our customers find incredible value of having this kind of capability that Attivio provides embedded in one of our products. Those are the products that we're going to lead with in terms of integration. Once again, we've already done it for a couple of our products and are exploring other ones with customers.
Okay. Thank you, Kevin. So I think we're going to take one last question. I have one last question in here, and here it is. Can't we just build this capability with our own IT team? For example, using developers to pull the data from the various sources and populate a data mart, and would that better meet our needs? So who wants to take a stab at that one?
I'd be happy to take it. I mean, I think Mike will have a lot to say on this. I'd be happy to provide some context from a life sciences point of view. I mean, I think this is a perfectly understandable thought that a life sciences company could take, because I think many researchers are very used to building their own databases and stitching things together. You know, bringing in a coder who can code in Python and write scripting and create databases. I think one of the misunderstandings in that approach is, yeah, of course you can go out and you can build a data mart. You can load all the data in from PubMed and Medline and the like. But when you look at what you're really trying to release here with your end users, the power of Attivio goes way beyond that. What Attivio really brings to the table here is the power to connect not just those publicly available data sources, clinicaltrials.gov, PubMed, and the like, but the ability to link that with your own internal systems, your ELN systems, and the right, all that. So you're doing more than just stitching public data together. You're really allowing an end user to see one unified result, no matter what systems they're using, no matter what synonym they're searching on. And the other part of this is, every time there's an update, you don't have to go and update that database. The system just will take in all that new data as it comes in. So you don't have to worry about staying on top of it. And that's where I think, you've seen a lot of failed data warehouse projects, because the use wasn't really, the real potential of what they were trying to achieve wasn't achieved by that approach. Mike, you probably have a much more intelligent way to describe it than I do from your conversations, not just in pharma companies, but across the number of industries you deal with.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's a doable approach, and it's often the approach that companies take, right? But it's a battle that they will begin, but it will quickly turn into a quagmire. Here's what happens: people in the business, researchers, whoever it is, they complain. I need to see this information. I need to see this information. I need to see this information, and they'll cite a few sources. IT will come in and say, okay, we'll build you an application. And that's where it comes from. It's like, okay, now what we have to do is we have to build a database for all of this, and then we have to build the application. Now, while they're doing that, someone says, well, now I need this other source. And a large company has a portfolio of hundreds and dozens of applications and data sources. It never ends, right? So the question is, well, why don't they consider search from the outset? Because search used to be really bad, right? That when a lot of companies now, when they think of search, they'll think of, or enterprise search, they'll think of SharePoint search or something, which is terrible. And so that doesn't even enter their minds. I think with cognitive search, you have the value of quick connectivity to any structured or unstructured source. You have the value proposition of being able to create custom interfaces and embed it into existing applications. And you have the AI behind the scenes which can organize this information for both ad hoc queries and what I mentioned before, those proactive or predictive queries within embedded applications.
Okay, well, thank you both. And I am going to add one. There is another question here in the queue. So this will be the last question, but I'd like to go ahead and take this question because it's related to what you were both just talking about. So here's the question. With so much data available to consume from a host of sources, what means are available to deliver information to a focused subset so that we can eliminate or mitigate too many results? And then they're also asking, can those results be integrated to other systems to streamline decision-making workflows? So who wants to take a stab at that one?
Well, this is Mike. I can take an initial stab. I think we've been trying to say that, but we didn't answer that question specifically. So you want to ingest all the sources, but through facets, through filters, more complicated filters, you can have a focused subset of the complete corpus of information. And that's all part of how do you give people contextual search, search that someone needs. So if, and I don't know, the specific sources you'd want to see within a lab notebook, and you'd want to see other lab notebooks, but probably many other sources, but you may not be interested in, these other 20 sources. So it's relatively simple to create different contextual partitions of the full corpus of the data.
I'd just like to add, well, let me say it a different way. This is a perfect example where a picture is worth 1,000 words. If you see the interface and you look at it pulling in data from an ELN system, you look at it pulling in from PubMed, you look at it pulling in, information from SharePoint and information from clinicaltrials.gov, and then you see how simple the user interface looks and how quickly you can interact with the data to get to the way you want to look at it and the information you want to look at. When Mike talks about facets, for example, and you see the point and click and the speed of the result and how quickly you get to it, it really, I think, crystallizes. When I'm in demos with customers or we're doing proof of concepts and the like, the light goes on automatically. People get it right away. But it is very hard to describe because we're trying to use words to show you something that, is really ultimately a visual experience that, your researchers and your scientists have.
Good. Okay. Thank you both for this session. We've had some really good questions and a great discussion session. We are going to go ahead and wrap up our session. Before we end, though, I do want to point out a couple of things. One is that if you would like to try the Attivio platform for yourself, you are free to do so. There's a free download on attivio.com, and there's a green button there at the top of the website. So it's very easy to download the platform, get started, and you can actually load your own sources then. The other thing I want to point out is that we have on our website what we call a 5-minute guide. So it's a very short white paper that talks about this topic, cognitive search for the life sciences. So if you'd like to follow up, that may be a good read for you as well. So with all of that said, I want to thank our audience for joining us today, and I particularly want to thank our two speakers, Mike Gualtieri and Kevin Potts. Thank you so much for participating today. Have a good day, everybody.